Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more epic tales every day. Liking this video helps us bring you more incredible stories, so smash that like button if you're ready for more. What would you do if you were in this situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Which part of this story surprised you the most? Share your reactions in the comments. I love reading what you think. If you could add one twist to this story, what would it be? Let's get creative in the comments. What do you think happens next in the human versus alien saga? Let's discuss your theories below. The Valkyries, a once proud race of warriors, now teeter on the edge of oblivion. Their world, Nidaria, lies in ruins, cities reduced to ash, their skies darkened by the constant threat of the draconis, a ruthless and vastly superior alien enemy. Once, the Valkyries were known throughout the galaxy for their invincibility, their precision in battle unrivaled. But the draconis had exposed a fatal flaw in their strategy: rigidity. Every move calculated, every attack meticulously planned. Against a predictable foe, they thrived. But the draconis were anything but predictable. The Valkyries had become statues in motion, their identical appearance reflected in their identical tactics. The precision they prided themselves on had become their greatest weakness. They could no longer adapt, and the draconis exploited that ruthlessly. Their numbers dwindled with each passing battle, their people facing extinction. Desperation settled in. Their final hope, a crew of elite warriors, had one option left: call for help, a plea sent out into the void, hoping someone, somewhere, would answer. Across the stars, light years away, the signal reached Earth. It fell into the hands of a man known for bending the rules of war as easily as he bent the laws of physics: John Stryker, Hale, Earth's finest pilot. A loner by nature, Stryker had never fit within the confines of any military organization. His superiors had called him reckless, dangerous even, but his results were undeniable. Impossible stunts, last-second improvisations, he thrived on chaos, and chaos had no place in structured battle formations. Stryker had always worked alone, preferring the freedom of the skies to the constraints of any squadron. On a remote flight exercise, where he often escaped the bureaucratic nonsense of Earth's space program, Stryker intercepted the Valkyrie's message. At first, he dismissed it as another distress call, the kind that had become all too frequent in a galaxy at war. But there was something in the tone, an unspoken challenge. His instincts, honed from years of risk-taking, told him this was no ordinary mission. It was exactly the kind of high-stakes, life-or-death scenario that made his blood sing. Stryker didn't hesitate. He left the barren outpost without a second thought, climbing into the cockpit of his ship, the Rogue Eagle. A marvel of human engineering, the Rogue Eagle was custom-built for speed and agility, made for a pilot who pushed both machine and body to their absolute limits. He plotted the coordinates for Nidaria, his mind already racing ahead to what might await him. A race of warriors calling for help. That was new. But he didn't care about their plight, not really. For Stryker, this was about the challenge, the thrill of outwitting the unknown. As the stars streaked past his cockpit, he found himself reflecting on the irony of the situation. Here he was, a man who had spent his life dodging rules and regulations, now answering the call of what sounded like the most disciplined crew in the galaxy. The Valkyrie's reputation had reached even the far corners of Earth's military files. Stoic. Precise. Emotionless in battle. Everything he wasn't. They were warriors cut from the cloth of tradition, and he? He was the knife that shredded it. He wondered what they were really like. Would they welcome him as an ally or see him as just another human, a species that had often been dismissed as inferior in this vast galaxy of empires? Stryker smirked at the thought. He didn't need their approval. He just needed to fly, fight, and win. And if these Valkyries wanted their enemies crushed, they'd learn soon enough that the rules they followed wouldn't save them. They needed him. More than that, they needed someone who could show them that chaos, when mastered, was the deadliest weapon of all. The journey to Nidaria was long, but Stryker didn't mind the solitude. Out here, among the stars, there was no one to question his methods, no one to judge him. The mission was simple: go in, assess the situation, and win. He hadn't yet decided if he would stay beyond that, but then again, he never did. One battle at a time. That was the only way to live. As Nidaria came into view, a broken world illuminated by distant suns, Stryker felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. The surface of the planet was pockmarked with craters, remnants of the relentless draconis' attacks. Even from orbit, the devastation was clear. But beyond the wreckage, he saw something else: order. The Valkyrie's base stood out against the chaos, a fortress of precision amidst the ruin. He brought the rogue eagle down through the atmosphere, landing in a designated docking area. As he powered down the engines, he caught sight of his welcoming party, tall, armored figures waiting in formation. They stood perfectly still, their gleaming armor catching the light of the setting sun, their faces hidden behind featureless visors. Stryker stepped out of his cockpit, his boots hitting the metallic surface of the platform. He felt their eyes on him, though none of them moved. This was it. The Valkyries in the flesh, or rather, in the armor. They were everything he'd expected and more. Perfectly identical, eerily still, they could have been statues for all the life they showed. And yet there was power in that stillness, an unyielding force that radiated from them. They didn't need to speak for him to understand that these women had seen more war than most humans could comprehend. One of them stepped forward, her voice sharp and cold, cutting through the silence like a blade. "John Hale, Earth's pilot?" Stryker nodded. "Most call me Stryker." She didn't react, simply nodded in return. "I am Captain Ira. We have heard of your reputation." There it was, that edge of disapproval he had been expecting. Stryker grinned, unfazed. "Reputation doesn't win battles. Flying does." Captain Ira didn't flinch. "We called for the best. You answered. We will see if you live up to your reputation." The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. Good. Stryker liked a challenge. He followed her inside, the other Valkyries falling into perfect formation around them, their synchronized steps echoing in the metallic corridors of the base. He couldn't help but marvel at their discipline, even if it was the very thing he would have to break. They needed him, but they didn't know it yet. Soon enough, they would. Soon enough, they'd understand that sometimes, the only way to win was to embrace the chaos. Stryker's first steps onto Nidaria were met with a bleak landscape. The planet, once grand and vibrant, was now a war-torn husk. He saw the remnants of once thriving cities, now little more than shattered ruins beneath a sky scorched by battle. The feeling of destruction hung heavy in the air, a grim reminder of what the draconis had done to this proud world. Yet in the midst of this desolation, there was order, a stark contrast that could only belong to the Valkyries. They were waiting for him, standing in perfect formation. Identical, expressionless, their tall, armored frames gleamed in the dim light. They moved like statues, synchronized, without a word exchanged. It was unsettling. Stryker had heard about the Valkyries, but seeing them in person was something else entirely. There was a coldness to them, a detachment that didn't sit right with him. They weren't individuals. They were cogs in a machine, and the machine had been failing. As Stryker approached, Captain Ira stepped forward to meet him. Her voice was calm, precise, but there was no warmth in it. She introduced him to the crew, each of whom looked exactly like the last. Their eyes barely flickered with recognition as they took in the human who'd come to help them. Stryker didn't need to hear their thoughts to know they didn't trust him. His reputation as a wildcard had preceded him, and in a crew that valued order and predictability, that was a red flag. They led him inside, walking through metallic corridors that hummed with the same efficient energy as their formation. Every step they took was in unison, every movement calculated. There was no room for error here, no space for deviation from the plan. As they walked, Stryker couldn't help but feel a deep disconnect. This wasn't how battles were won. This wasn't how you survived the chaos of war. Soon enough, it became clear. The Valkyries lived by strict regimented tactics, honed over centuries of combat, and it had served them well until now. But against the draconis, their rigid approach was proving fatal. Their discipline was their downfall, and Stryker knew it. He could see the hesitation in their movements, the way they clung to protocol even when it clearly wasn't working. They fought like machines, and the draconis had taken full advantage of that. He observed them as they ran simulations, their tactics perfectly precise but painfully predictable. Every maneuver, every strike was calculated to the last millimeter, designed to maximize efficiency. But the problem was clear: they didn't improvise. There was no flexibility in their approach, no instinct guiding them when things went wrong. The draconis thrived on unpredictability, and the valkyries were failing because they couldn't adapt. Stryker watched in silence for a while, letting them demonstrate their flawless, yet ineffective, strategies. Then it was his turn. The simulation switched to him, and instantly, the tone changed. His movements were erratic, wild. He flew his ship in ways that defied logic, pushing it beyond what the simulations could predict. He broke every rule they held dear, flying too close to the edge, taking unnecessary risks. But the results were undeniable. He succeeded where they had failed. The valkyries stood in stunned silence, their expressions unreadable behind their visors. But he could feel their confusion, their disbelief. To them, his tactics seemed reckless, dangerous even. They couldn't understand how someone could fight like that and survive. In their world, everything had to be controlled, measured. Chaos had no place in their battlefield. Captain Ira was the first to speak. Her tone was sharp, her frustration barely masked. She couldn't accept that his wild maneuvers were the key to winning. She challenged him, questioned the value of unpredictability in war. To her, it was a gamble, a reckless leap into the unknown that could just as easily get them killed. Stryker didn't flinch. He'd heard this all before. He had spent his entire career being told he was too reckless, too undisciplined. But what others called recklessness, he called survival. He countered Ira's argument with one of his own: the draconis weren't following a script. They weren't playing by the rules the valkyries held so tightly to. In a war like this, the only way to survive was to adapt, to embrace the chaos. The tension between them hung thick in the air. They were at an impasse, two warriors from different worlds who couldn't see eye to eye. Stryker respected the valkyries' skill, their discipline, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. Ira, in turn, saw his methods as reckless and undisciplined, a threat to the order she had spent her life upholding. But they didn't have the luxury of time. The draconis were closing in, and if they didn't come up with a new plan soon, there wouldn't be a Valkyrie crew left to save. Reluctantly, they agreed to work together. Stryker would show them how to fight with instinct, how to adapt in the heat of battle. In return, the Valkyries would teach him their disciplined approach, blending their precision with his improvisation. It wasn't an easy alliance. The Valkyries struggled with the concept of letting go, of trusting their instincts rather than following a rigid plan. And Stryker had to adjust too, finding ways to harness their precision without stifling his own chaotic style. The tension between him and Ira remained, but there was a grudging respect beginning to form. They trained together, running simulations that combined the Valkyrie's structured tactics with Stryker's unpredictability. Slowly, they began to find a balance. Stryker showed them that improvisation didn't mean recklessness, it meant survival in an unpredictable world. The Valkyries, in turn, taught him the value of discipline, of knowing when to strike with precision. Still, there was doubt on both sides. Could they really trust each other when the real battle came? Would the Valkyries be able to let go of their rigid control, or would they fall back into old habits when things got tough? And would Stryker, the lone wolf, be able to rely on them when the chips were down? Neither side was fully convinced that their plan would work, but they had no choice. The draconis were coming, and if they didn't find a way to fight together, Nidaria would fall. The uneasy alliance between Stryker and the Valkyries was their last hope, a fragile partnership that could either save them or destroy them all. The battle erupted without warning. The draconis had struck earlier than expected, catching the Valkyries mid-preparation. Alarms blared, and the sky over Nidaria lit up with the approach of enemy ships. The Valkyries scrambled into action, reverting immediately to their precise, disciplined formations. They moved like a well-oiled machine, But there was no time to implement the new hybrid tactics they had barely begun to practice with Stryker. Stryker, already in his cockpit, didn't wait for orders. He launched the Rogue Eagle into the air, weaving through the chaos with ease. As the first wave of draconis ships descended, their unpredictable assault overwhelmed the Valkyrie defenses. They fought back, but their rigid strategies made them predictable targets. Within minutes, several of their ships were under heavy fire, struggling to keep up with the erratic maneuvers of the draconis. Stryker was in his element. He dodged between enemy fire, his instincts guiding him through the battlefield. While the Valkyries followed precise flight paths, he took risks, cutting across enemy lines, pulling impossible aerial stunts, and using the terrain to his advantage. He quickly realized that the draconis weren't expecting someone like him. Their tactics were designed to exploit the Valkyrie's predictability, but Stryker was anything but predictable. He pushed his ship harder, diving into enemy formations and taking out draconis' ships with a series of rapid, unorthodox maneuvers. The Valkyries noticed, though they hesitated to follow. They were trained to stick to the plan, even as it became painfully clear that the plan wasn't working. Their numbers were thinning, and for the first time, Stryker could see the cracks in their facade. They were warriors, yes, but they were losing. As the battle raged on, Stryker's success became impossible to ignore. One by one, draconis' ships fell to his daring tactics, his wild maneuvers leaving them confused and off balance. He looped around, strafing the enemy with precise shots before disappearing into the fray again. Captain Ira, watching from her cockpit, began to understand. Stryker wasn't just surviving by luck. There was a method to his madness, a rhythm to the chaos he created. It was working. But the Valkyries were still bound by their training, their discipline holding them back. They hesitated to break formation, unwilling to fully commit to the unpredictable style Stryker had been trying to teach them. That hesitation cost them. A draconis ship targeted Captain Ira, locking her in a hail of fire. She tried to outmaneuver it using the Valkyrie's tried-and-true tactics, but the draconis were faster, more agile. Her ship was pinned, her movements predictable, and in that moment she knew she wouldn't survive. Stryker saw the danger. Without thinking, he pulled off a move so reckless it defied logic. He dove straight into the line of fire, cutting across Ira's path at the last second and drawing the draconis' ships away. His ship shuddered under the barrage, but he held on, pulling off a high-risk maneuver that sent him spiraling through enemy fire. Ira watched in stunned silence as he turned what should have been a death sentence into a daring escape. That was the moment it clicked. For Ira, and for the Valkyries watching, Stryker's actions shattered their rigid mindset. It wasn't just about precision anymore. It was about instinct, about adapting in the moment and trusting your gut. Stryker's chaotic, unpredictable style wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. And it had just saved her life. Ira's voice crackled through the comms, calm but with a new edge. All units follow Stryker's lead. The Valkyries hesitated for only a moment before falling in line. They broke formation, abandoning their rigid tactics in favor of something new. Stryker led them, his wild maneuvers no longer an anomaly but the foundation of their new strategy. They began to fight as a cohesive unit, combining their precision with the improvisation they had learned from Stryker. It was a sight to behold, Valkyrie ships moving with their trademark precision, but now with the fluidity and unpredictability of human instinct. The battle shifted. The draconis, once in control, began to falter under the combined onslaught. They had never faced a force like this, a blend of the Valkyrie's discipline and Stryker's chaos. One by one, the draconis ships fell, their advantage evaporating as the Valkyries adapted to the changing tides of battle. Where they had once hesitated, now they attacked with a fierce, unpredictable fury. They had learned to improvise, and it was devastating. As the draconis' fleet began to retreat, the victory was clear. But it had come at a cost. The battlefield was littered with the wreckage of Valkyrie's ships. Many of their own had fallen, warriors who had been unable to adapt in time, or who had paid the price of holding to their rigid ways for just a moment too long. The Valkyries had won, but the losses were heavy. Stryker landed back at the base, the adrenaline still coursing through him. His ship, battered but intact, was a testament to the risk he had taken. He stepped out of the cockpit to find Captain Ira waiting for him. Her armor was scratched and scorched, but she stood tall, her eyes meeting his with something new, respect. "You saved us," she said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of what they had been through. "Your tactics, your way of fighting. We would not have survived without it." Stryker shrugged, still catching his breath. "You learned fast. That's why we won." Ira nodded. She knew he was right. The Valkyries had changed, and so had she. The cold precision they had once relied on was no longer enough. They had learned to trust their instincts, to fight not just with their minds but with their hearts. It was a lesson that had come at a high price, but one that would make them stronger for the battles yet to come. The other Valkyries gathered around, their stoic faces softened with something Stryker hadn't seen in them before: recognition. They weren't statues anymore. They had become something more, something human. The battle was over, but the war wasn't. They had survived this fight, thanks to Stryker's unconventional methods. But now, they were ready for whatever came next together. The dust settled over the battlefield, but the weight of the loss lingered in the air. The Valkyries stood together, gazing at the wreckage and the bodies of their fallen sisters. They had fought bravely, but the price of victory was etched into every scar on their armor, every solemn look exchanged between them. The draconis had been driven back, their fleet shattered, but the cost had been high. Nidaria had hope again, but it came with the weight of sacrifice. Among the survivors, Stryker walked quietly, the adrenaline fading from his veins as exhaustion took its place. He'd flown countless missions, faced odds that would crush most, but this was different. The stakes had never been so personal before. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about belonging, something he hadn't expected to find here on a dying world with warriors who had once seemed more like machines than people. The Valkyries, though silent, acknowledged him with respectful nods as he passed. He wasn't one of them, not exactly, but after what they had been through together, they saw him as more than just an outsider. He had saved their captain, led them to victory, and taught them something they had never thought they needed. His methods, as wild and chaotic as they were, had become part of their survival. And they recognized that. Captain Ira approached him, her usual stoicism softened, though grief still clung to her every word. "You did more than we asked for," she said, her voice low but full of gratitude. "Without you, we wouldn't have made it. Your tactics, your instincts, they saved us." Stryker, weary but smiling faintly, shrugged. "You learned fast. You adapted when it mattered. That's why we won. You just needed to loosen up a bit." Ira didn't laugh, but there was a slight shift in her expression, a small acknowledgement that she understood what he meant. Her pride wasn't wounded. Instead, it was transformed. She saw now what Stryker had been trying to teach them all along: rigid discipline alone wasn't enough. Sometimes, survival meant throwing out the rulebook and trusting yourself in the chaos. She extended her hand to him, something unspoken passing between them. "You're one of us now, Stryker. An honorary Valkyrie." The title hung in the air, heavy with meaning. It wasn't just a formality. The Valkyries weren't known for giving praise or titles lightly. For them, this was a gesture of trust, a sign that they saw Stryker as more than a human pilot who had helped them in a moment of crisis. He had become part of their crew, part of their future. Stryker hesitated, not out of doubt, but because for the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged. He had always been the rogue, the thrill-seeker, the one who thrived on being alone. But this was different. He'd connected with these warriors in a way he hadn't with anyone else. Their respect, hard-earned through battle, was worth more to him than any medal or commendation he could have received on Earth. "You sure you want a guy like me hanging around?" he asked, though his smile showed he already knew the answer. Ira's tone was resolute. "You've earned it. We need your instincts, your unpredictability. You showed us a way to fight we'd never considered. That makes you a Valkyrie, whether you like it or not." Stryker didn't need more convincing. For once in his life, he felt like part of something bigger than himself. He had found a team, a crew that understood him, even if they had come from completely different worlds. The bond they had forged in the heat of battle wasn't something he could walk away from easily. The Valkyries were already making repairs, preparing for the next fight, because they knew this wasn't over. The draconis might have been pushed back, but they would regroup. War never truly ended, not for warriors like them. Stryker had a choice to make: return to Earth, where he could continue flying solo, or stay with the Valkyries and face whatever came next, together. He glanced at the sky, then back at the Valkyries. Earth felt far away now, a distant place that didn't hold the same appeal it once had. The thought of going back to his old life, of flying missions alone, with no one to watch his back, felt hollow. He had tasted something different here, something that made him feel more alive than any solo flight ever had. "I'm staying," he said finally, the words coming out easier than he expected. "I think I've still got a few tricks to teach you." Ira nodded, unsurprised. "Good. We'll need them." The decision made, there was no need for further discussion. Stryker felt a sense of calm settle over him. The battle had changed him, just as it had changed the Valkyries. They were no longer the cold, emotionless soldiers they had been before. They had learned to trust their instincts, to embrace the chaos, and to see each other as more than just parts of a machine. As the crew prepared for what was to come, Stryker couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd all come. The Valkyries had learned to adapt, to think beyond their rigid training, and in doing so, they had become stronger. Stryker, in turn, had learned that there was more to being a pilot than just the thrill of flying alone. There was a deeper satisfaction in fighting for something greater than himself, in being part of a crew that respected him not just for his skills, but for who he was. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Stryker didn't mind. For the first time, he wasn't facing the unknown alone. He had the Valkyries beside him, and together, they were a force to be reckoned with. They had beaten the odds once, and they would do it again. He knew it. As the Valkyries' ships lifted off from Nidaria, setting a course for their next mission, Stryker felt a thrill of excitement. This was just the beginning. The galaxy was full of enemies, full of challenges, and now, he wasn't facing them alone. He was part of something bigger, something powerful, and for once, he didn't need to fight against it. He was a Valkyrie now, and whatever came next, he was ready. The stars stretched out before them, endless and full of possibility. Stryker grinned, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline as the ship picked up speed. This was his new home, his new crew. And with them, the adventure had only just begun.